Welcome to Out Here with Kids. I'm your host, Nancy Weaver, and this is where we talk about the messy, clumsy, hope nobody's watching moments that come with raising kids. Every week, we talk about those struggles and what happens when they spill into public spaces, and how ordinary people can support instead of judge. If you've ever tried to stay calm in aisle 7, this podcast is for you. So this episode, we are going to talk about punishment, because there's a really interesting discourse going on in social media now about, are we making kids too soft? And is it okay to yell at kids? And do we need to yell at the kids to toughen them up? And I want to comment on this kind of social discourse about punishment, spanking, hitting, and see if we can approach that conversation in a bit of a neuroscientific way. So I have a phrase that I use when I'm talking to students. I think it's even on my bookshop, and I call it, kids are not mice. Many of the ways that we have started raising children are based upon the operant conditioning principles of Skinner and all of the experiments that Skinner and his colleagues did to kind of figure out how to get a mouse to do what you want the mouse to do. And then we took all that and we moved it over into child development and parenting and child raising. And so what has happened is we've taken these like operant conditioning principles and sprinkled them in our schools and our parenting stuff. And we have this assumption that is so culturally embedded right now that we have to punish kids in order for them to learn. Okay, so I want to spend the episode talking about that. A lot of the things we focus on here are taken from my own experience as a mom of 3. There was one time, there's probably many times, but we'll just talk about one time. There was one time where, some things happened in my basement that I was like, kind of turning the side eye. And I remember pulling my son aside, and my initial orientation was like, send all these kids home and you're grounded and you're never going to see the light of day. Because I was sort of raised in a time when that was really popular, the whole go to your room, you're grounded kind of approach. And I had always assumed that that was sort of how you made sure your kids kind of towed the line and were raised to know what was acceptable behavior. And I remember my son looked at me like I had 3 heads and was like, okay, I get that this crossed the line. I get that this wasn't okay. Why do you feel the need to lay all these punishments on me? And I took that as an opportunity to really hear his question. I was like, let me think about that. And that started this very interesting search where I was thinking okay, what does the research say? If I am a really thoughtful mom, come on, I have a PhD in behavioral science. I've been doing parenting work for a really long time. If I am the kind of mom who likes to ground my parenting decision-making in actually what I know to be solid science, let me go look at the science. So I went and looked at the science. What does the science say about the need to punish your child, either at home or in school or other places? Is that how kids learn? And I dug into the literature. I tell you, I'm like a need to know kind of girl. So I was doing my little literature search and annotating bibliographies and really looking at culturally how we've handled that over the decades. And here's what I came to find out. The answer to that question is no. Kids do not need to be punished in order to learn. And once you kind of entertain that idea, then the next question is, well, how the heck do they learn if it's not due to punishment? Let's unpack that a little bit. Here's what the old punishment ideas were. Let's talk about that first. So the old punishment model was you did something wrong and you had to walk out into the woods, pick your own switch, bring it back, and your parent would swat you with the switch across your But. So I grew up in West Virginia, and that's a story that we heard often. And then when I talk to parents across the country, there's always some version of that, back in the 40s, the 50s, and 60s. And then that transitioned into, well, maybe we shouldn't hit our kids. Maybe we shouldn't swat our kids. There's no belt. There's no spoon. There's no ruler. That's sort of phased out of our public idea of punishment. And then we started to send our kids away. Like you cross the line, go to your room, or you can't handle your emotions right now. You're really too upset. You're in my face. Go to your room. We started moving kids away from us and isolating them. And we thought the isolation was going to then change their behavior. And that was pretty commonplace for a long while. And why is that? Okay, because operant conditioning. When mice are put in this thing called a Skinner box, they meander around this little box. And Skinner was really smart. He was like, if we give the mice a reward, like a little pellet of food, will they learn that if they push this lever, the lever gives them a bite of food? And then so we will condition their behavior of lever pushing on eating these pellets of food. And he did these experiments, and sure enough, it doesn't take long before a rat's like, I got it. I push this lever, I get food. Yay. But then it's kind of went a step further. So what if we don't want a mouse to do something? We don't want him to sit on this little electric plate. And when he does, we're going to zap him, and they get a little shock. And the mouse quickly learned to ignore and stay away from this plate. Okay, so over time, on a increasingly complex series of experiments, we learned that mice can be taught to behave in such a way that conveys either a reward of the pellet or a shock, a punishment, okay? And then we took this into child rearing, and we said to ourselves, well, if mice can be taught by rewards and punishments, let's reward and punish our children and see if that shapes their behavior. So we started doing that. Like, you get all A's on your report card and you get a treat, or you get called up onto stage at school, or, you've accomplished something, you get rewards. Your picture in art is particularly beautiful. You get a star. We started thinking about well, if we want the behavior to continue, surely we should keep giving rewards. And the converse was true as well. If we wanted to extinguish a behavior, we would punish a kid or call out their negative behavior. And the reward charts, the behavioral management systems are a relic of that. So there are these things in elementary schools called, clip charts, behavior management systems. They're called a bunch of different names. But if a kid misbehaves in school, they go up to this chart that's very public, and they clip their name from the green area. They have to unclip from the green area and put their name on the yellow area or the red area because they've misbehaved. And then their mom gets a phone call, their dad gets a phone call about how Johnny misbehaved in school today. And the idea is that if a kid gets humiliated in this public way, that they're going to surely stop this bad behavior. Okay, so that's the history of behavior modification. It's based upon these Skinner concepts of operant conditioning, mostly with experiments with mice. I want to talk about the problems with that operant conditioning approach to raising children. And I want to use an example, okay? Let's find a kid's name, Amir. Let's say Amir is a 4th grader, and Amir really struggles with math. And so Amir was in his 4th grade classroom, and he's having a hard time with math, and maybe he's dyslexic. Maybe he struggles just with the numerical concepts. Maybe he has a hard time following directions or sitting still. What happens in Amir's body is that his nervous system, when he gets a math sheet, his nervous system becomes a bit dysregulated. So he's faced with a math sheet that he is unable to do for whatever reason. So he will move from a window of tolerance. His nervous system will go from being in kind of a flow state to a state of either hyper or hypoarousal. He will maybe become dysregulated. Dysregulation looks like fight or flight or freeze or rage or anger or dissociating. A whole bunch of ways our nervous system is made to protect us when we are faced with a math sheet that we don't know how to do. Okay, so here is Amir. He's in 4th grade. He gets this math sheet. And his body kind of goes into this state of dysregulation. And his teacher might notice a variety of things about Amir. She might notice that he's fidgety, talking to his neighbor. Maybe he crumples up the math sheet and throws it away. Maybe he puts his head down on his desk and takes a nap. Maybe he gets really angry and throws his pen across the room, or spits on the floor, or stomps out of the room and goes down the hallway. There are a range of things that the teacher could see that are sort of Amir's external display of how his nervous system is feeling. And if the teacher is a really, really well-trained teacher, she or he will know that Amir's behavior is simply an expression of what his nervous system is unable to express. The teacher will be able to be curious and be a detective and say, aha, something's going on with Amir in this math sheet that's really upsetting him. Let me see if I can help figure this out. Now, the unskilled teacher will say, Amir, you're being a brat. You don't know the rules of this classroom. You can't leave the classroom. You need to get up off of the floor. Pick your head up and do your math sheet. And if you don't finish your math sheet, you will stay in from recess. And then Amir's like, I don't understand the feelings that are happening in my body. My nervous system is freaking out. And now the one thing subconsciously that he knows can help reset his nervous system, playing outside for a little while, is going to be taken away from him until he can do something that he is currently not able to do and chill out and do his math worksheet. So we've compounded the problem. Not only do we have a dysregulated Amir, we have a dysregulated Amir who is unable to access his tools for regulation. And then because the teacher hasn't provided Amir the support he needs to figure out what's going on with this math sheet, Amir doesn't learn the skills he needs. Maybe he's really struggling with a math lesson and doesn't understand the directions. Well, he's never going to learn that if he's punished for the display that his nervous system is offering to the teacher. So it's really this very complex interplay between skills and regulation and curiosity. And this is a cycle. So if the teacher gets freaked out about Amir's behavior, the teacher is also going to become dysregulated. And the teacher is going to not be able to access their prefrontal cortex and their thinking brain to be able to understand this about Amir. And these things happen all across America. They happen in schools. This cycle happens in homes. It happens out on the street. It happens in grocery stores and libraries and all sorts of public spaces. And so at Support Over Silence, we really train and we really lean into the neurobiology of behavior. And even when we're talking to people about sort of how you build a community that's really supportive, even with the criminal justice system, we try to think about children as being not fully formed adults, like that prefrontal cortex, that thinking brain, that's not formed until your 20s and your 30s. So if a 16-year-old is doing something bad or mischievous and you ask that kid, hey, babe, what are you thinking? Well, the truth is that she's probably not thinking. She's operating from this place of her amygdala, her brainstem, these places that are reactive and emotional because her prefrontal cortex, that thinking brain, isn't quite developed yet. To tie that back to our original idea, it's an interesting concept to think about punishing kids. Because if we understand the neurobiology, then we realize that punishing kids for doing something that is appropriate and understandable in the perspective of their brain development really doesn't make any sense. If we punish a kid for not doing something that they're physically unable to do, that leads to shame. And shame is one of the most powerful aversive emotions that we hold in our bodies. Now, I'm going to take this one step further because, I'm a public health professor. We think about prevention. And we are launching a new program called Ollie. And I want to kind of foreshadow some of that a little bit because you might think it's just a matter of like punishment, no punishment, like figuring out how you as a parent, you as a teacher, you as a coach are going to relate to your players, your students, your children. And I want to layer another concept onto this decision that we all make when we're choosing how to relate to children. And that is this notion of protection. And I think if you're not swayed by the argument of like, hey, punishing your kids is not particularly productive and can be harmful, and in fact, rewarding your children also can be unproductive and also harmful, but that's a story for another day. If you're not swayed by this idea like punishment, maybe I shouldn't be kind of using that in my arsenal of parenting tricks, I hope this other little piece might help us think a little bit deeper about this idea of punishment of our children. And when bad things happen to kids, and they do, and the research on child sexual abuse is pretty clear. That's like 1 in 3, 1 in 4, 1 in 8 kids are sexually abused, exploited, trafficked, groomed. Those kids often do not tell their parents what happened. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. I'm going to make another podcast about that. But they often don't tell their parents these horrible things that happen to them. And when you ask them why, a couple things come up. One of the reasons that children don't tell their parents when horrible things happen to them is that the children will say, I know that what happened to me was really bad. And I don't want to burden my mother with that. I just don't want to tell my dad about that because I know he would really freak out. I don't want to disrupt my family because it was somebody in my family who treated me this way. I don't want the breadwinner of my family to be cast out because then what would we do financially? So children take on the role of protecting the adults in their family by continuing to suffer at the hands of their predators so as to protect their parents and their caregivers from experiencing that emotion. The other thing they say is that if my parent caregiver knew of the things that happened to me, either they wouldn't believe me or they would kill me. They would punish me. I absolutely could not take this to my parents because I would get in trouble. I would get in trouble for wearing a short skirt or accepting the ride from that person that I don't know what turned out to be a horrible person, but I thought he was a nice guy. I would get in trouble for, finding somebody online who told me that he was actually my age and I drove across town. So children, do you know how easy it is for predators to target children? And once a bad thing happens, the kid thinks it's their fault, that they've been stupid, that their parent is going to punish them. So let's link that back to the original conversation. If a child knows that it's a parent's practice to punish them when they misbehave, to send them away when they misbehave, to disconnect from them when they misbehave, a child is a lot less likely to bring things to their parents. So as we kind of wrap up this conversation about punishment about kind of historically where this idea of punishment has come from and how punishment can really get in the way of our connection with our kids. And that it's that connection with our kids that protects them if and when these horrific things happen. I hope this gives us a little bit of a context to rethink kind of these basic assumptions we have about parenting. You don't need to punish a kid in order for that kid to learn. Kids have an innate sense of curiosity, of development, of learning, of thriving. If we kind of let them do their thing, they will be beautiful, wonderful humans. Lead by example, set guideposts, love them with curiosity, lean into those moments of connection. And not only will that make parenting feel a little easier for you, and not only will it deepen the relationship you have with your kid, it is also very, very protective.